The time has come for South Africa to formalize the entire economy. We can no longer be half pregnant. We can't drive this economy forward of one ever diminishing cylinder. We need everybody to get behind this economy. In a week that's been dominated by the budget and discussions around the budget, eventually the discussions went down this very boring thing, and this is not just to talk about the budget again. You've heard enough. We know that the state doesn't collect enough money to pay its debts because it spent money like a drunkard with a credit card. We know that we are not getting enough income from taxes. Government won't cut its expenditure. We heard Fikile and Balula talking about the fact that the ANC will never cut expenditure. We understand why. They've got their deployed cadres to worry about. So we are not going to balance the budget that way. But as we always do on the State of the Nation weekly update, I want to give you some food for thought that people aren't talking about. Because to me, we have a very, very big issue, and it's time for us to tackle it. And that is our ridiculously small tax base. Now, here are some terrifying statistics. We've got 28 million registered taxpayers. That's most of the adults, right? Fine, they're registered. But less than 7 million pay tax. In actual fact, the figure's close to 5 million people that actually pay income tax. 3% of South Africans pay 76% of our taxes. And 77% of our taxes are paid by the diminishing white population. Now, the question is this sustainable? It cannot be sustainable. The reason that the tax collections are lower than what the government likes to spend is because the white population is getting smaller, but they're the only people that are paying a bulk of the taxes. Now, I know by now there are people that are going to be jumping up and down, and they're going to be talking about VAT payments and indirect taxes, which is true, fuel levies and such. That's paid by everyone. And that was the reason that the finance minister had no option but to raise VAT, because that's the only way he can spread the tax net a little bit wider. But I'm saying that it's time for us to do what we've been way too scared to do for 31 years of the new South Africa. And that is to pull everybody into the tax net by making everybody that runs a business formalize their business. And I think it's going to have two effects. One is going to spread the tax base. It's also going to make more South Africans part of this economy, and more South Africans understand just how ridiculous our economy is run with all of this red tape. So let's have a look at this. Let's understand why we're in the predicament we're in. And it starts off with our favorite industry, and that's the taxi industry. And I've got a lot of sympathy for the taxi industry, and I'll explain to you why. The taxi industry is an integral part of the South African economy. If there was no taxi industry, just about every business would grind to a halt because your workers can't get to work. They're efficient. Imagine if everybody had to rely on the trains and the buses that the state puts on. You'd never, ever have anybody pitching up at work, never mind living a normal life. Now, the taxi industry, we've got lots of gripes. They do not respect the rules of the road. They kill people and all sorts of things. We know the tropes. We know what's going on in the taxi industry. But let's be fair here. At the end of the day, they're running a business. Now, the ANC didn't they inherited the taxi industry. The taxi industry had been flourishing from the 1980s, from the time that minibuses came onto the market, which was in the sort of early to mid 1980s, and they were seen as a way to ferry people around in the absence of public transport. And they did. The idea of taxis spread like wildfire throughout South Africa because there was a rampant need for this. The apartheid government had bigger problems on their mind and worrying about formalizing the taxi industry. It was too fraught with political tension, so they wouldn't tackle it. Right? Roll forward to the new South Africa. At that stage, the taxi industry is now very, very much a part of the South African landscape as it's remained. And the first administration of Nelson Mandela and others, they just looked the other way. They weren't going to go and say taxi drivers, please pay your taxes. Now, we've had millions of goes at this in various ways. We've had taxi recapitalization programs. There's been appeals. There's been everything. But yet, taxis have never been brought into the tax net. Now, this isn't a bleat about bringing taxis into the tax net and making them pay taxes on their profits. They keep fares low because they don't charge taxes. They don't pay taxes. So therefore, maybe there's other solutions. But what the taxi industry did was it was the thin edge of the wedge towards a far bigger problem, and that is our massive and rampant informal economy. South Africa now has a very, very big, a very substantial, what we call township economy or secondary economy. These are just nice ways of saying that these are economies that have sprung up without any regulation. They're not formalized. These businesses aren't in the tax net. And we've had Gigi Alcock on the show speaking to us about township economies. And this is a part of the economy that is a good news story. It shows that South Africans are entrepreneurial and they'll do it for themselves. They're not waiting for the state to do it. But it's time to make those economies as formal as, say, your shopping centers and so on. Now, what is that formal economy made up of? Made up of things like spaza shops, shebeens, shisanyamas, car washes, spare bedrooms, housing in the backyards of current houses. This is a big, big and vital part of the economy. But I don't care who you are. If you've got two options, one is I can register and pay taxes, or option two, I don't register and I keep all the money for myself. I don't think too many people are going to choose option one unless some policeman's going to come calling or some SARS official's going to come calling or you're going to get a massive fine. No, none of this is happening. So, of course, those entrepreneurs in that secondary economy, as we politely call it, keep their businesses outside of the net. And wouldn't you? I would do the same thing. And the government has known about this for a long time. But they've turned the great old government blind eye to this. Why? Why have they turned the blind eye to it? Well, they decided to proceed with one old strategy which has worked until it stops working. And just like every bad tactic, things work until they stop working. Ask Manchester United. And the tactic has been that there was a big formal economy that they inherited from the old South Africa, and we'll just milk that economy to death. They will pay the taxes, and we will then just allow informal economy to go about their businesses without any taxation. And the government has gone overboard with what was the old formal economy by creating miles and miles of red tape. And it's through that red tape that they keep people paying taxes. So in other words, if you want to do business with the state, you better have tax numbers and you better have VAT numbers and you better be up to date with everything. And of course, our corporates who are in league with the government, they are the big sort of attack dogs of government. And if you want to work with a big company, you have to be tax compliant and all that. And that's all fine. But what happens if you just have a store on the corner? Well, according to the law, you should be compliant with tax and you should be compliant with other rules and regulations. But as we've seen with spaza shops, it's a hell of a lot easier to operate outside of that net, especially if you know that no inspectors are going to come to your door. This tactic of only taxing the formal businesses has now reached its end. In actual fact, it's overdue because you cannot get more water out of this particular stone. And big formal companies are getting more efficient. They've got fewer people. There's a age of digitalization. They've become far less ripe for the plucking than what they were. So it's time. The time has come for the economy now to be formalized. Companies, if you are going to open up a shisonyama, you need to follow the same rules as a person running a restaurant, or else you can't run a business. Now, this would be politically devastating. The ANC have always had strongholds in the townships. Part of that stronghold, part of the reason why their strongholds have held, is because those people in the townships have understood that no inspectors come here, and the rules that apply to the rest of South Africa don't overly apply here. Therefore, they'll keep voting in the ANC, even though the ANC doesn't provide services, but at least the ANC isn't putting them in the formal net. The net result is that our tax collections are going down. And as Edward Kieswetter, the guy in charge of SARS, said, we can't raise corporate taxes anymore. There's just no more room. We need to grow the economy where people are growing the economy. And if we think that this is just a bleat about saying, oh no, those people must be taxed. No, I'm going to say that there have been two effects of not applying the law, of not formalizing the economy. Number one, you have this idea that that's fine, that informal economy will stay in those areas, let's call them formally black areas. And this part of town, which is nice brick buildings and paved roads, they can pay the taxes. Well, oddly enough, those informal businesses didn't stay in those parts of town. In actual fact, they've moved into the cities, and there's not a city or a town in South Africa that doesn't have a ton of informal businesses operating in the very cities that used to run formal businesses. You can't go to an area of an old industrial area of a city where you used to have mechanics and panel beating shops and so on, that isn't still operating as a panel beating shop, but they're a chop shop now. That place isn't paying taxes. They're not paying PAYE for their earners. They're not paying taxes on their profits. They are running informally, and our officials just won't tackle it. The second most obvious part of that bad tactic of keeping people outside of the net is that the longer you do it, the harder it becomes to get those people back into the net. So if you're a car wash that is not registered and not paying tax, you charge 100 Rand for a car wash. That's fine. People are okay with that. You pay the person washing the car their salary, but you don't deduct tax. That person now, imagine he comes and pitches up to get his car washed. Instead of it being $100, he has to now pay 115 Rand 50 because we've increased VAT. He's not going to be too happy. Now, unless you've got somebody enforcing that at every car wash, that you're getting VAT from every car that gets washed, right? You've got a problem. Now, this is where, it's all fun and games to drive around in blue light brigades. But at the end of the day, you've got to govern the country, and this is what it's about. Going out there, creating systems, inspectorates, whatever it is, that gets people into the net, and then enforce it. And much like we've seen with corruption, if you don't have some high-level cases where you actually take people and prosecute them when they break these laws, right, the system's never going to hold. Now, the government by now is sitting with two options. Because you may be asking the question, hey, why should we formalize the economy? Well, we got two options. We could either operate like every rich country in the world, which is formalized with tax codes and operating procedures that are clear and nobody better not comply or else they'll end up in jail. Or we can have our version of Nigeria, where chaos reigns. What is the outcome to that? Is that government gets less income. At the moment, it's manifesting only because some fat cats suddenly might lose some of their perks. But we already see roads that are in a state, street lights that don't work. We already see sewage running in the streets, water not running in the taps. This is what happens when you don't have enough tax and you don't have systems and everybody isn't contributing. Now, I think it's quite a simple thing. We've got two choices. And to me, it's very, very simple. We either decide that we want to be a rich country because we have made the decision to be poor, but we can make that decision to be rich. If we make that decision to be rich, we apply the laws to everybody. We bring everybody into that tax net, and instead of 5 million people paying all the tax, I'm talking about the income tax and the profit tax, and we increase that to the global average, which is 50%, which would mean about, in this case of taxable people, it would be about 20 million people paying tax. Then we'll have surpluses and the country will be rich. And isn't that what we all want? So I think that the thing that hasn't been said in this whole budget debate isn't about the tax net. It is time for the government to do their work and to understand that we've turned a blind eye to this informal economy and the time has come to get everybody paying their share. If you agree with me, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, support Pace Car Rental. They help keep us on the air. Subscribe to the channel and we'll see you again on the weekly update. Thank you. We've got some great news. We are having another State of the Nation business breakfast on the 16th of April at the Sandton Convention Centre. Our speakers for this particular event, Minister Gayton McKenzie, probably South Africa's most popular politician at the moment, and well-known analyst and a guest many times on the State of the Nation, Dr. Frans Cronje. And these two gentlemen will be keeping us informed of where South Africa is and where it's going to. If you want to come and join us at our breakfast, have a look at the information in the description below. We'd love to have you there.